All right, folks, back again for another night. And thanks again to Damon Allen for joining me last night on the show. And my guest tonight, and he's going to be joining me in just a couple of moments' time, is my longtime friend and longtime broadcast partner, Paul Jones. Jonesy is there. I see him joined in here. See if we can invite. And we'll get set, get ready to rock with Jonesy. And thanks all of you again for joining me yet again for another edition of Midweek. I've enjoyed doing the shows, and hopefully you've enjoyed watching as well. Jonesy's now into the mix.
E. Smith.
Good to see you, Jonesy. You got in and you froze right away. Huh?
Should I be putting headphones in?
You know what? It actually sounds a little better when you do, so if you got them handy, you could.
Okay, hang on. No, you send me searching for, oh, no, you know what?
You don't have to. Right now, your internet connection's more spotty than anything else. At least I think it's your connection.
Yeah, I think it might be. Let me get off the Wi-Fi here where everybody in the world is using it and get onto data. Can I do that?
All right. Yeah, I think so. Well, and if you pause or go away, we'll just get you right back into the mix.
Okay, hang on.
Live social media here, folks. I won't call it live TV, but I guess technically it is in a roundabout way. But live social media. I actually just finished watching with my family Rocky IV. So
how's this?
I'm all fired. That's much better. Much better.
Okay.
And a big hello to Kevin Weeks, who's watching right now.
Weeksy, rate you, Weeksy. Weeksy does some great stuff. He's always on live with the NHL stuff. I can't keep up. I just I can't keep up. So
Jonesy, I don't know if you've watched any of these or not, but I've been trying to look kind of bigger picture with folks, and it's funny for us. As long as you and I have known each other and been working alongside each other, we haven't necessarily, dug deep into your past. I mean, I've heard the history and I've heard the stories plenty from you over the years, but I don't know how much the audience knows of where it all started for you. So bring me back to St. Clair and as a kid and being in the home and growing up with your brother and in a sports family and where it all started for you in terms of the sports passion overall.
Well, we were sports fans because my dad was a sports fan. There's no other way to put it. We grew up on St. Clair Avenue above a laundromat. And by the way, there was a fire one night in a laundromat, and we had to jump out of a second floor window onto a half roof and then go down a ladder to escape it. But my dad we lived above a laundromat, and on Saturday night, and you probably experienced this because from your days at Humber with the diversity there, immigrants come to Canada and freaking love hockey, right?
Yeah.
You just fall in love with it. And my dad came from Jamaica and fell in love with the Leafs. And every Saturday night, when I was a kid, the game started at 8:30. They were on at 8, but from 8 to 8:30, you had to listen on the radio. Hello, Canada and hockey fans across the United States, Foster Hewitt. And then they came on TV at 8:30 with his son, Bill Hewitt, doing the play-by-play.
Yeah.
And my dad had usually been to the beer store, and he had the only TV in the hood, and probably 4 or 5 of his buddies would come over. Alan Gray, who we called Big Daddy, who lived on the first floor below, like the laundromat, and then there were 2 floors, 2 apartments, one, and then the second one way up. We lived on the second one. Alan lived on the first one. And Alan had older kids, Cecily, Zoe, and Ronnie. And then his other cronies would come over, Harold Brown and Ainsley Roach, and these guys would come over and they'd sit and watch hockey. And Mark and I would sit on the floor in front of them, probably about 3 feet from the TV. And you know the way the Italians celebrate when there's a goal in the World Cup on St. Clair Avenue? That's what you got in the Jones household. I said it in my Instagram post when my dad passed away, and I was talking about this year. I will miss boisterous celebrations because that's what they were. In hockey, in later years in basketball, like that, and that's where it started for us. And because we shared a room, Mark and I, we would often sit out there till the hockey game ended before getting up to go to church the next morning. Or Monday night football, my mom would complain because it started at 9.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to be in bed going to school. And like, it's like my dad goes, oh, I'll put him to bed at halftime. It's like 10:30 and we're going to bed. Like that's like unheard of. Like, so we got that passion for sports from him. Um, when boxing matches were actually on TV, we'd sit in front of the TV and watch Clay, later Ali.
Yeah.
And I remember March 8, 71. We're coming up on the, actually, no, yeah, next year we're coming up on the 50-year anniversary of Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, that fight of the century. And I remember sitting around the kitchen table with Mark and my mom listening to the reports on the radio because my dad had gone to the theater to watch it closed circuit with his cronies. So we got our love of sports from him. Whatever was on TV from a sporting standpoint, he was watching. His buddies were coming over, and Mark and I were sitting there watching it, be it hockey, football. That's how I became a Browns fan. You and I have talked about this. Church ended at like 10 after 12 every Sunday. The Browns were on at 12:30. They were the only game in town on the CBS affiliate because the AFL, where the Bills were, like, wasn't drawing anybody. And he would say, I got to take the boys home. Meanwhile, he really wanted to get home to watch the Browns on TV. So, yeah, be it the Kentucky Derby. I still remember horses' names from those derbies back in the day. There was a Canadian horse named My Dad George. And like whatever was on from a sports standpoint, we watched. And he wanted us to be well-rounded, but he knew, having been on teams himself, that being part of sports was a good life experience. The other day, my mom got a call at her condo from, I guess now the last living classmate of my dad. They won the Manning Cup in Jamaica. It's emblematic of high school soccer supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
The one and only time his school has ever won it, 1942. I think he was like 16 or 17 in high school. They won it. And he was on the team with his buddy Orville, who lives in Florida now. And I would be around, and he and Orville, he'd call Orville, and the two of them would talk about this game that they won. It's funny, I looked it up for his funeral. I looked it up, Calabar High School. They won the Manning Cup one time in 1942 or 1943, and he was on the team. So we got our love, Mark and I got our love of sports from him. And he was hard on us, though, and so was my mom. Like, they would say, like, how come you can memorize all these stats and know all these numbers? And when the NHL had original six, I knew every guy on every team by number, but I couldn't memorize 3 lines of Shakespeare, and I would get in trouble for it. So our love of sports came honestly, following it, reading the paper, watching it on TV, and then later being involved. My mom and dad would drive Mark and I to the public school around the corner on Tuesday and Thursday nights, where an old Jewish guy named Saul Tenenbaum, who drove a cab, taught us how to play basketball. And we learned the right way. If you dribbled the ball too much, Saul would yell at you. You know, you had to pass and cut and move and don't hold the ball and get layups. And just, we learned that from, for me, grade 7, from Mark, grade 4. And, you know, if there was a track meet, they wanted us to go. Like, anything to keep us busy and keep us out of trouble and basically keep us off the street.
Let me ask you something. You mentioned your earbuds. Do you have them handy or nearby or no?
What's that?
Your earphones, your earbuds, your buds. Do you have them or no?
I don't.
So all right, just leave it then. I'm getting a little bit of feedback when you're talking, but it's not a big deal. We'll just keep going here. You mentioned the boxing, Jones. Just don't worry about the buds. It's fine. You're talking about the boxing, and I know I've heard this story over the years, but I think it's interesting for the folks that are watching. And I partly bring it up because as you were joining, I don't know if you heard me, but I just literally like 40 minutes ago finished watching Rocky IV with the family. Yeah. So I've got boxing on the mind now. But you mentioned your dad and soccer, but obviously there's a connection with your dad in terms of being in the ring as well, and the history, the foundation that he laid as a fighter back in Jamaica as well.
Literally a fighter, yeah. And as a soccer player, he made sure Mark and I played soccer. And he always said to us, if you have kids, let them play soccer. It's the best game for footwork and balance. Everything's done with your feet. And it's funny, we look at some of the great players in the NBA that played soccer, right? Olajuwon,
Sure.
Kobe, Nash, like they all played soccer. And Dad was also into boxing. And he was in boarding school when he was a kid. His parents were teachers, and they taught in Africa and England. And because of the war, when they left him, they couldn't get back from Africa to Jamaica. So he basically grew up with his aunt and in boarding school. And he took to boxing. And I guess he would have been in grade 11, maybe the equivalent of grade 11 or 12, won the boxing championship in a 3-round fight. And the picture was on the front page of the paper, but he had his sisters hide it so his parents wouldn't see that he was boxing. He had a black eye and he was all beat up. But yeah, we tried it once, like he got Mark and I gloves, and it was a heavy bag and stuff. And we sparred with some guys, and like a couple hits to the head, it's like, that's it. I'm out. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this.
So when did, I mean, I knew you grew up playing a bunch of sports and obviously watching a bunch of sports, being a fan of sports in general, but when did the basketball itch first start? I mean, you were playing a whole bunch of things, but when was it that you kind of started to gravitate towards basketball more than anything else?
Probably in grade 7 or 8, we started going to playing at McMurrick Parks and Rec with Saul Tenenbaum, the taxi driver who taught us. And that's when basketball became big for us. And then we went to Oakwood. We happened to go to one of the high schools in the city, as chance would have it, that was a huge basketball school. And from the time you got in there in grade 9, you were learning how to use your left hand to do left hand layups, and basketball. Now I played football, ran cross country. I was on the golf team. I was on the rugby team, like everything at high school, but the focus was always basketball. And that's when it kind of caught me. And then the summers going to New York too, because we'd spend the summers in New York and there was basketball all around you. And I later find out that the park that we played at in New York was a pretty famous one. Chris Mullin played there. Anthony Mason later played there. If we would have stayed in that area, there were 2 schools. Christ the King, where Kenny Anderson went.
Yep.
And the public school was Cardoza, where Rafer Alston went. So we would have ended up at one of those 2 schools. But my dad decided he would come back and live in Canada. But yeah, the basketball itch basically hit us in grade 9. And
so that would have been around mid 70s for
72.
You? So early 70s. Okay.
And that's when, by chance would have it, the Knicks were really good too. So
yeah,
the Knicks they won in 71. But yeah, and I'm watching games on ABC on Sunday afternoon, and I'm watching Wilt Chamberlain block Lou Alcindor's hook shot. Like, we're sitting in front of the TV, this old Philco black and white, watching the end of Wilt and the start of Kareem. So basketball was, we became pretty entrenched in basketball pretty early.
It's funny when you just as a sidetrack here, you mentioned kind of Wilt going to Kareem. I had a guy message me the other day on Twitter when I posted a picture of me and my Magic Johnson jersey in the background, because that was my guy.
Right.
I'm born in 75. I honestly, at 4 years old, don't necessarily remember 79 with Magic, but I certainly remember the early 80s and then the run through the 80s with the Showtime Lakers. Yeah. So before MJ came in, MJ being Jordan, of course, not Magic Johnson, I got hooked on Magic and I got hooked on the Lakers first. And this guy was like, razz me. He's like, what is this Magic Johnson? I'm like, well, first of all, he's a guy that we could still talk about being in the conversation, but he's at least a guy that I'm throwing in the top 5 all time. But nevertheless, to be there, and I mean this respectfully with your age, you've seen the transition, as you just said, from Wilt to Kareem, and then from Kareem to Magic to Jordan to Kobe to LeBron, and the stars that you've seen. When we talk about the all-time greats, outside of, and I know there are more names, but outside of the, whether we're talking about Bill Russell or John Havlicek or Jerry West, you have seen in your lifetime as a fan, let alone as a broadcaster, arguably 3, 4, 5 of the greatest of all time that the league has produced.
Well, it's funny because when the conversation for greatest of all time comes up, people dismiss Kareem. And if you were talking about a complete career from high school, university, pros, there's just no question. If you're talking about a complete career, it's Kareem.
Right.
Like the guy won at high school at Power Memorial in New York. He won 3 most outstanding players in Final Fours. By the way, he couldn't play as a freshman. He might have lost, 3, 4 games as a university athlete at UCLA.
Yeah.
And then he comes to the pros and he wins, I don't know, what do you win? 5 championships, 4 MVPs, 5 MVPs, has a shot that nobody could stop. Like it's as a career, it doesn't, but you're right, Eric. I mean, when I think back and think of being a kid, and we would have our team parties at Saul's place, at Solly Tenenbaum's place. He lived on Bathurst Avenue, right across from St. Mike's. And, George Routens used to come to that gym. He was Leo's older brother. Mm-hmm. Leo was behind me. George was ahead of me. And George used to come to the gym and play. And like I said, going through that sequence of players and watching, growing up watching Little 3 basketball. I mean, the chats that Jack and I have, and when John Beeline came to Toronto the last couple of times, having coached at Niagara and Canisius, and when I see Calvin Murphy and I talk with Hubie Brown, Bob Lanier, like these are legendary names around Little 3 basketball with St. Bonaventure, Niagara, and Canisius. And, I was telling somebody today, I was on with Javon Shepard, and I said, yeah, Oakwood we used to play preliminary games at Maple Leaf Gardens before the Buffalo Braves.
Yeah.
I stood in the tunnel beside Ernie D and walked by Pete Maravich and looked him in the eye, and he said, hey to me, because one of the prelim games, the Atlanta Hawks were playing the Braves, and it was crazy. And it didn't even have Maravich on the back. They could still have nicknames before David Stern came. It said Pistol on the back of his uniform. Those experiences are crazy. And our colleague from ESPN, Amin El Hassan, always says, some people are researchers. Some people learn about the NBA game from YouTube clips and reading books and whatever. And I'm fortunate, and one of your guys too, Eric, he's my guy too, Mike Cates, we're fortunate enough to be witnesses. I saw Wilt. I saw Kareem's entire career. Bill Walton was one of the best college players I'd ever seen. I remember watching the Final Four in '75 and talking to Marcus Johnson, who was at UCLA. He's now a broadcaster for the Bucks, talking about him and Richard Washington and Wooden's last games. And I don't know if you were with us, Eric, when Rob Babcock took the entire team to lunch with John Wooden. Were you there?
I wasn't.
Okay, so that it was the next year that you and I started.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that was.
I heard about it from you, but I wasn't there. I wish.
It was legendary. Here I am, a kid from Toronto, sitting in a ballroom in Los Angeles, listening to John Wooden. That is crazy. So yeah, just going through that whole transition and watching the game evolve to where it is pretty amazing when I look back.
So when you're talking, Jonesy, about the early high school years and playing all the sports that you did, and then gravitating more so to basketball, I got into this conversation with Damon Allen last night, where at some point in every young athlete's early career in their life, they realize, or they start to get a sense, or their parents do, somebody does, they recognize the it factor. Was there a moment for you when either you or your dad, a coach, somebody realized, all right, this guy's got something? Because it takes something to eventually go on and play at the university level as well, and to be on that, play at the highest level in terms of being able to represent your country at whatever level it may be, to walk around with the maple leaf on your chest as well, and to do that, to play for York, to play for Canada. At what point did you say, or did somebody say, that guy's got something?
Nobody really said it, because to be honest, Eric, I never really had it.
You had to have had it to some extent, Jonesy.
What I had was what I had was dogged, inexorable perseverance. Like I'm stubborn. Like I refuse to give up.
Yeah.
And I mean, I sat on the bench in high school. I skipped a grade in public school. So when I went to high school, I was actually a year ahead of where I should have been. So I had 2 years as a bantam. Then I had 2 years as a junior and 1 year as a senior in grade 13. And the teachers went on strike in grade 13. So while we were the best, maybe the best team in the province, we never got a chance to play for the OFSA championship. And I played as a second year bantam. I played as a second year junior. I was small. I was skinny. I was a year ahead of where I should have been. But I just loved the game. And in my senior year, I didn't even dress for all the games. I mean, the team picture in the yearbook, I'm standing there in jeans and a sweatshirt because it wasn't my turn to dress the day that they took the team picture. And I was like 5'8.5" in grade 13. I didn't grow till I hit first year university.
Right.
And I walked into Bob Bain's office and I said, when's the tryout? And he said, oh, it's Monday at 4:00. And, he started to talk. He said, what's your name? I said, Paul Jones. And he said, yeah, where'd you go to school? I said, Oakwood. He goes, oh, Oakwood. Because he was recruiting a couple of guys. He said, oh, I saw them play. I don't remember seeing you. I said, well, it might not have been one of the games that I dressed, but, I'd really like to try out. And he said, yeah, your coach told me you might come out for the team, your coach, Al Quantz. He said, what did you say your name was again? Paul Ford? I'm like, no, Paul Jones. Like, okay, all right, we're going to fix this. And I went out and practiced on the first day and like, who's the best guy? I'm going to guard him, and it was at that point where he said you could be on the team, but you might not play a lot. I'm like, are you kidding me? Again?
I've been through this.
Again? So I didn't stay. I concentrated on my schoolwork. And when I went back the next year, he said, last year you made it on potential. We've got other guys with potential. This year you're going to have to make it on skill. I said, well, I'm here. And that was the first of my 4 years. And that picture you put up for the show tonight,
Yeah.
that was my freshman year when we won the Wilson Cup, the Ontario Manager. I'm like, where'd you find that? Like, that's
So
crazy.
I'll tell you the crazy thing. I wrote you back and I just said Google skills. It took me all of about 2 minutes. I know I've seen pictures that you've posted before. At least I thought you posted them. So when I wanted to have an old school picture of you from your playing days and a picture of current day. I went onto your Instagram. I searched through all your photos. I couldn't find anything. So then I go into Twitter and I hit media and I scroll and scroll and scroll. I go back to like 2014. I'm finding pictures of you and me with longer hair. I couldn't find a damn picture of you from high school or college. I'm like, what the hell? I know I've seen these things before. Yeah. So I go into Google. I put in Paul Jones, York University, and it brings up, your Hall of Fame picture from York University. But you're in a suit and tie and you're like 45, 50 years old. So then I go back in again. I go, Paul Jones, York Lions. And then I don't find anything. I'm like, oh, hold on a second. Paul Jones, York Yeoman.
Yes.
So I start searching. And I think maybe about 4 or 5 photos down, it was from, I could probably find it right now if I fired up the computer to my side here. It was from the Toronto Public Library photo archives. And it says, like, whatever the hell year it was. What would that have been? 79, 81, 79?
It was the Ontario.
It said 79, and it mentioned there's 4 or 5 people in that picture, and it mentioned everybody's names, and it said number 3, Paul Jones.
Yeah. The guy beside
I'll send the link to you afterwards. So
the guy beside me holding the trophy is Ted Galka. He's our captain. He lives up here in Newmarket, retired teacher. And the 2 guys on the right of that picture, Lonnie Ramadi, played for Pete Carrill at Princeton. And he told me, he goes, oh, Jonesy, he would love you because you're a little guy and you work hard. He hated us big guys. Our offense was all guys running around and you had to pass the ball and this and that. And then the other guy on the far right is Paul Laevsky, who's a Crown lawyer now. They were both in law school. And I just happened to show up that year when, David Coulthard, who was voted 2-time player of the year in the country from Tilsonburg, showed up. And I ended up on a good team. And we won the Ontario Championship, and off we went to nationals, and it was the start of a great 4-year run at York University.
Now, at what point did your connection with playing for Canada at various levels come into the mix? And I know you've told the story to me again over the years, but your opportunities to play at times overseas, and especially playing against some of the big U.S. teams and going toe to toe against the likes of a Byron Scott and whatnot. And how did that all come together? Again, by your own words, you're saying you got through on scrappiness and dogged determination, not on talent. But again, there's got to be some talent there if you're ultimately playing with the maple leaf on the front of your chest. So how did that come together for you?
Well, in 1983, it was a year before the Olympics.
Yep.
Canada, being a Commonwealth country, was entered in the Commonwealth Games, Commonwealth tournament. It coincided. It was at the same time as the Pan Am Games in Caracas, Venezuela. And it was the year before the Olympics. So the big team probably wanted to get a look at the USA, who had Ewing and Jordan and all these guys. And that team, with the likes of Leo, Jay Triano, like the big boys, they went to Venezuela. They needed another team to go to New Zealand. And by the way, I heard Venezuela, like the athletes' village wasn't finished properly. There was concrete all over the place, no toilet paper. They just had a terrible time. And here we are. Now they looked at our club team, and the club team that I played for was littered with former national team players. Wayne Allison, who was the director of athletics at Sheridan. Jim Zoot, who'd played professionally in the Philippines and with the Pistons for a bit. David Coulthard, player of the year in Canada, my roommate at York 2 times. Bo Pellick, all Canadian. We just had Tom Heslop, Brady's dad, who's rest in peace. He's gone. Tommy was an all Canadian at Guelph. And they looked and they said, why are we going to have a tryout for? And then there's guys like me and Enzo Spagnolo, all Canadian, all conference. They said, why are we going to have a tryout when we've got basically a national team type sitting there? You know what? Here's the Maple Leaf. You guys go to New Zealand and represent us. Pretty soon I'm trotting out there with number 6 on the front of my jersey. It says Canada across the front. And it was eye-opening for me because, I mean, after we dispatched of some of the lesser countries, Malaysia, Fiji, we got in with the big boys. We got in with England, Australia, New Zealand. And the year before, 1982, at the World Championships in Cali, Colombia, Australia had beaten Canada. And Australia had lost to the USA. Now, the USA team, they were pros. Doc Rivers was on that team.
Yep.
They beat everybody. Kevin McHale. They beat people like crazy. And we got to the semifinals against Australia, and all the people from New Zealand, being in New Zealand, were cheering for us. And when the game ended and we beat Australia, we're walking off the court, and some of the guys on the Aussie national team, who was, by the way, coached by Lindsay Gaze, Andrew Gaze's dad. Andrew Gaze later played at Seton Hall. They looked at some of us and said, right, where you been? Because they played the Canadian team and beat them the year before. And this was a, quote, misfit team of.
Yeah.
And we beat them.
Yeah.
We beat them. And they were like, how come none of you guys have had a chance? And that was the first time I thought, you know what? Maybe I do deserve a shot at the national team. But it was kind of a closed shop, and you couldn't always get in. But from out of that tournament, and we lost the gold in overtime to England, who ran the 5-man motion offense known as the flex, and we couldn't stop it. And it was at that time that one of the guys who played for England, Carl Tatum, said to me, I'm going to talk to somebody. You need to come and play professionally in England. And he was playing for Crystal Palace. And I got calls from them. And I remember talking to my mom and dad, and they said, what are you going to do? I said, I'd like to go. And my dad said, just fine. It's fine. But remember, if you go, you are this close to finishing your master's degree in sports psychology. And you're probably going to come back here and coach and be involved in basketball. So you can go, but I'm telling you, if you go, you're not finishing that degree. And I'm like, oh, so what do I do now? He said, you decide. You're a grown man, you decide.
Yeah.
My mom said, you do what you want. You can go. I said, but American money, like a car, an apartment, playing professional basketball. And then they said,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? You're going to come back here? I said, well, probably. Like, I said, well, why not get started here? And that's when I used my teaching degree and got into the school system.
Any regrets?
Of not going to play pro, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that and my son Andrew's, is a third-year volleyball player at York, and he's already talked about maybe going to play volleyball professionally in Europe when he's done. And if it works out, he's made some connections. I would tell him go for a year
Yeah.
or two and then come back.
Yeah.
That's the only regret. Now, things worked out for me. I was playing in France on a club team with Jay Triano, Leo Routens, and I came back from France, and Mark was player of the year at the regional in Victoria, and asked the late Peter Watts, if TSN had any jobs, because he was looking for a summer job because he was cutting grass at York. And he said, yeah, call me on Monday. Mark called him. He got a job as a broadcast associate. I'm playing in France, kind of bouncing around the teaching world, doing occasional teaching. And he called me on a crackly line. I'm in Calais, France. And he says, when you come back, come to TSN. Ask for this guy named Scott Moore. They got jobs here. I'm like, got jobs? I'm like, what the hell do you know about TV? He goes, nothing, but I know about sports. I said, well, what do you do? He said, I sit there. I watch TV. I'm
Yep.
like, what? He goes, I sit there and I watch TV all night. Last night I watched 2 basketball games and a hockey game. I wrote the highlights, and Michael Landsberg and Jim Van Horn read every word. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, no more going to the Danforth to ask the guy to turn the satellite dish.
Yeah.
Like, you could. And so I started there, and I just never cut the cord. Keith Pelly, Rod Smith, Dave Randorf, you name guys that have gone through there, and we've all worked together. And it's. I mean, I regret not playing pro, but man, I can't regret the way things worked out.
No, and that's the thing. I mean, when you think about it from a, I don't know, from a sports personnel perspective, as we've experienced. I mean, I've experienced it for 22 years now, or 23 years. You've experienced it from day one, as an original broadcaster with the Raptors, and we'll get to that in a second. But the people that talk about, had Ben Uzo knock out the triple double, and the Raptors don't lose the coin flip, and then they end up getting the higher draft pick, so then they end up getting, you follow the domino effect of things. Had the Raptors drafted Andre Iguodala instead of Arujo, and had Vince Carter stuck around, or had Chris Bosh not left, it's all those woulda, coulda, shouldas.
Yeah.
Everything that kind of happened, including all of the pain, put Toronto in a position to ultimately make the moves, make the signings, make the drafts that put them in a position to win the championship last year. And had you gone overseas, I mean, sitting here listening to the story, and I've heard the story in part before, I'm still shocked that you didn't go play professionally. But at the same time, you stayed, you still ended up getting to play in some capacity. You finished your master's, you became an educator, you end up working at TSN, your foot's in the door broadcasting-wise. Less than a decade later, suddenly the Raptors come into existence, and boom, boom, boom. So you just don't know. I mean, maybe it's a great way of looking at what we're going through right now. And you know me, you've been around me long enough. I'm not necessarily the most optimistic guy. I like to think I'm a realist, not a pessimist, but I'm definitely not an optimist. And maybe it's a good way of looking at it right now, what all of us are going through at this point in dealing with this pandemic and dealing with COVID-19 and trying to think of when we're going to get out of it, when we're going to be on the other side of it. I know there are people that are going through a lot of pain right now, literally and figuratively. They're going through a lot of financial strife and stress. But I'm hoping at least that all of this means something in the end, and we look back on it and say, even if we aren't better for it, we learned from it. Yes. And because of what we learned, we ultimately end up being better for it.
Things have a way of working out, and you just never know. And I mean, we've had these talks, and I know you always joke about this, and I have a friend the same way. You always say you're not a religious guy, and how events in your life have had you say you're done with religion. But I mean, I look at you the same way, and there's other people that I talk to that you don't have to be religious to live your life the right way, like a religious person. And religious people will say things have a way of working out. They always say, call it faith, right? Faith is taking the first step on a dark staircase when you can't see the end, but you do it.
Yeah.
And things kind of have a way of working out. And, I'm confident, like, had this happened 10, 15 years ago, I'd have been stressed to the gills. Not that I'm not stressed now or anybody isn't, but yeah, you kind of go with it. Like there are things you can control and things you can't. And some of the things you can't worry about. So I look back at it often and say, wow, what if I'd have gone to London to play for Crystal Palace? Would all this have worked out? Maybe not. Maybe this was, it was destined. It was supposed to happen this way. And like you said, I go to TSN, and then, I'm still entertaining hopes of playing in the Olympics, and I'm getting a tryout in '84 and I break my leg. And then, '88, I'm still thinking about it. I'm 30 years old. I'm teaching school, and the principal lets me off through our collective bargaining agreement to go to Halifax for the senior national tournament. I'm an all-star in that tournament, and they say some of those guys are going to get tryouts for the big team for the Seoul Olympics, and I break my leg again. Like,
Yeah.
it ain't happening,
Hey, but you end up being there anyways in '92 because of the media stuff, because of
Right.
getting in at TSN, and then you end up there in a capacity working with the broadcast and working with on the media side of things. So you still made it. Unfortunately, yeah, you'd rather have been there as a player, but you still end up going.
And that was a great Olympics. I mean, John Shannon and Scott Moore called me and said the NBA is sending a team to the Olympics for the first time. And I'm thinking, wow. And like the NBA, USA basketball went flea hunting with a tank. Like they sent a Hall of Fame team.
Yeah.
Stockton, Barkley, Malone,
Hall of Fame
Robinson.
team plus Christian Laettner.
Yeah, Robinson,
Yeah.
Magic, Jordan, Bird, Ewing,
Yep.
like Drexler, like everybody. I always say, had they put Shaq on that team, it would have been a total Hall of Fame team. Leitner's probably the only guy that's not, and I don't know, is he in the Basketball Hall of Fame?
Because of his college stuff, honestly, I'd have to look that up. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm not positive, but that's the thing, and it's a good point you bring that up, Jones. Is that, and we're guilty of this sometimes with especially in Toronto with the NHL. It's not the NHL Hall of Fame. It's the Hockey Hall of Fame. It's the
right.
Basketball Hall of Fame. People get caught up in the fact that they focus so much on NBA. Well,
Right.
and that's why not to steer the conversation away from where we were, but that's why I think anybody that doubts that Vince Carter's getting into the Hall of Fame, first of all, I think his credentials put him in period for what he did in
Yes.
the NBA. When you focus on what he did at the Olympic level with USA, then when you talk about the impact that he had on the game within another country and helping grow the game in Canada, that alone says, as a basketball player in the Basketball Hall of Fame, he's getting in.
Oh, that's no question. No question.
All right, let me circle back then, because I kind of jumped all over the place here. But you're still playing in '88 while you're teaching. As you just said, you bust your leg again, which, for all intents and purposes, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of ends
That's
the
it.
career
That's
in
it.
terms
Two
of
broken
playing. So you're
ankles,
done
same
now.
same ankle
Yeah.
broken twice. That's it. Done. Pack it up.
All right. So now you're solely focused on the academic and education career,
Right.
but yet
Right.
you're still double shifting and pulling the moonlighting by working at TSN in the nighttime. How are you balancing that, having a full-time job as a teacher while also carrying this job at night and trying to burn that candle at both ends?
I was. I mean, look, our lifestyles make us nocturnal, right? Like you and I mean, years traveling on the plane, and it's,
Yep.
we're flying from Milwaukee to Denver, and you're losing time, and it's like 1:30, and you're like, the flight attendant comes around, oh, Mr. Smith, what would you like on the menu to eat? And like, I mean, you and I think about it, like, should I have that chicken parm at like 2:30 a.m.? Like, probably not, right? But I mean, and I was always kind of nocturnal by nature. I'm a late bird, and so I tried to cut the cord at TSN when I got a full-time teaching contract. And they said, well, what are you going to do at night? I go, dudes, I got lesson plans. I got marking. They go, yeah, and you're going to do that till what? You come home from school, you coach your team, you get home at 6, you work till like 8 or 9. And then what are you going to do at 9? I said, I'm going to watch the game. They said, well, why don't you come in here and keep watching the games and keep writing highlights? And I did that. And it just kind of, I mean, I'm a single guy. I'm living at home. Like there's no, and I'm meeting guys that are as crazy about sports as I am. Like these guys are fully certified nuts about sports. And I'm still
Yeah.
in the business with, I'm still looking at them. Rod Smith, Dave Randorf, Paul Romanuk, Scott Moore, like Scott Carson, like we're all nuts. I mean, we were talking on Twitter the other day, Scott Carson's birthday, March of 1987. He and Mark finished the shift at TSN, and Jordan and the Bulls are playing Isaiah and the Pistons. They leave the newsroom at 1:30 and drive to Detroit, get a hotel, sleep for a few hours, go shopping, buy tickets, and sit there. And Michael scores 61, and Mark's saying to Scott as he's wearing his Jordans, he's like, "Sit down, man. We're in Detroit. Sit down, sit down." And I am burning the candle at both ends, but I'm paying my student loans back. I'm having all kinds of fun. I'm coaching teams. I'm teaching school. I'm coaching teams. I'm coaching the high school all-star team in Toronto against Jalen Rose. These guys are coming up from Michigan, and we're playing them, and we're hanging right with them. And I'm coaching that team because I thought I was headed for coaching, and you know that doesn't work. But in '92, I get a call to go to the Olympics to work, and you know, it just that kind of started things. '94, the World Championships come to Toronto because of the civil war in Yugoslavia. Leo's supposed to do radio with Mike Inglis. Somebody gets sick on TV. Leo moves to TV. Rick Delena, who was Mike Keith's assistant at Humber, calls Inglis. Inglis calls him and he said, "Call Jonesy. I think he'd be a perfect fit." And boom, there it is. Little did I know Isaiah Thomas and John Bittoff were watching and wanted an all-Canadian broadcast team. And you know, and here we are.
So that was '94 at the Worlds.
Yeah.
When Canada's, maybe if they're not getting booed, they're certainly not getting cheered as people are waving the Greek flags all over the place. And we've heard that story a bunch over the years. So then, you know, '95, '96, and the Raptors come into existence. As you just said, now you've got Isaiah Thomas and John Bittoff listening in. So you get hired, you and Mike Inglis, as the original broadcast crew at CFRB. And now this is the bad thing that I thought I was doing a good job of, Jonesy, over the first 2 weeks of the show. And now I'm back-to-back nights with Damon Allen last night and now you tonight. I'm looking over at the clock, and it's 10:44, and I've got like 16 minutes left, and we've just started the Raptors. I don't know how I'm supposed to wrap 25 years into 16 minutes. So you might be coming back for a second episode in like 3 or 4 weeks or something. Unless the pandemic ends, the isolation and the quarantine ends, and this show doesn't exist because we're back doing actual Raptor broadcasts.
I saw your YouTube channel. I just started one on my own. I got to find out how to do that. Good on you, man.
All right. So, all right. With no disrespect to CFB, this isn't about me trying to just talk about the fan stuff, because I know there are a lot of stories from the original days. But to go from the 3 years at RB, then the Fan 590 acquires the rights, and Swirsky and Armstrong are hired, but then in fairly quick fashion, you're back with me doing pre, half, and post, and you never really left anyways because you've been wearing some sort of a hat, whether it be at TSN, whether it be at Sportsnet, whether it be at the Fan. You're one of those day one original guys. So I'm going to go back to some stories that you and I have experienced as a team together over the last 15 years. But when the Raptors won last year and you and I called that game, and then you go down to the floor, what's going through your mind when you think about where you came from as a kid, where you went in high school, where you were in university at York, burning that candle at both ends, educating and also working in the media. Then at some point over the course of your careers, you drop the education part to focus solely on the broadcast. And now here you are in 2019 with the confetti rolling down on you and all the players as you're doing the interviews, and I'm up there traffic copying, and here we are an hour later, an hour and a half later, you and I together holding that trophy.
It's crazy,
that you've been watching since you were a kid. Like, I mean, how mind-blowing was that?
It was absolutely, it's like I don't know who said it, Leo, Sherm, somebody on one of our crew calls. It was like an out of body experience.
Yeah.
Like, you've seen this scene your whole life. You and I were at a finals in Miami. Remember that one?
Yep.
And you had to leave the night that they won the trophy, right? Like,
Yeah.
and we're standing on the floor, confetti coming down, and that's the Toronto Raptors up there. You've seen the scene your whole life. You've actually been part of it with two teams with no attachment, and yet now it's the team that you follow. And I think I turned and said that to you at the parade. Somebody, one of my old trustees, Bonnie Taylor, snapped a picture off a screen grab of the camera at the parade with you and I at the front of the truck. And remember that you when
I
that
do.
you showed up, he goes, "I got no hat. I'm going to get burned." And I borrowed a hat from somebody, and I had it on
Yeah.
backwards. And we were
Yeah.
standing up at the front of the truck, and she sent me that picture, and I'm like, I remember turning to you, going, "Can you believe this?" Do you remember that? I turned.
Yeah,
To you,
I definitely do.
I
Yeah.
said, "E, can you believe this? Like, this is crazy." And I thank Chris Clark for putting us together.
Yeah.
Because I was on TSN and I was doing sidelines, and I kind of stepped away from the main broadcast, and they said, I think you'd be good with Eric Smith. And I'd been listening to you, and I knew you'd kind of worked on Gordy Stellick's show and whatever. And then boom, we get a show, Hoops, on Thursday night, and it's simulcast for a while. And then, I'm on the broadcast team, and Romanuk leaves, and Nelson says, "I'd like to put Eric in." I said, "Guy loves the game." He said, "But he never played." I said, "Hey, you don't have to be a chef to know a bad meal. I mean, we're gonna talk about the game. Our broadcast will be a little bit different, but and then here we are in 2019, and like that picture with the trophy was, to me, it was the top of the hill, more so than the time that well, not the night, because we didn't get our rings on that night,
Yeah.
but that night when we stood in the locker room with the stench of champagne and the two of us standing there holding the trophy. I mean, like it's crazy to imagine. It really is.
For me, Jonesy, the night with the trophy, like after Game 6, and getting a chance to hold that thing and have a picture taken, by myself with it, then with you, then with the crew and whatever, and to be in the locker room getting sprayed with champagne and trying to do interviews and going to the bar afterwards when it all was settled and partying till to the wee hours of the morning and all that. It's obviously something I'm never going to forget. It's a life moment and a life memory, let alone a career moment and a career memory. But when you talked about that parade, listen, I would have been blown away if there were 50,000 people, if there were 500,000 people. But the fact that we had the view that only a select handful of people had.
Yes.
And listen, I know there were only a select few that were actually in the arena for the game as well. But to be on those buses and looking out at that crowd, the amount of times that, as you just said, I looked out, especially when we were coming up York University. I mean, as wild as it was at the Princess Gates and coming along Lakeshore and making our way down under the Gardner Expressway, I mean, it was a mad sea of people. But when we made that left-hand turn to go up York University,
and we passed Union
and then as
Station,
we crossed, say that again?
when we passed Union Station.
I was just going to say, when we passed Union at Front Street, and then we got to like Adelaide and King and Wellington and whatever, and up to Queen and all that, to look east and look west and see people like 3-4 streets deep, I kept saying, I can't believe it. I can't believe. I was just blown every time I turned my head. I'm like, I don't believe it. I don't believe the amount of people that are here, and it's terrible that there was, the sour moment at the end of it all. I talked to Devlin about this a couple of weeks ago, and the masterful job he did trying to keep things calm at Nathan Phillips Square with the shooting. That to me still didn't sour the day overall, and I mean that respectfully to anybody that unfortunately got caught up in that incident, because otherwise what I saw was 2.5 million people just there to party, and I didn't see any roughhousing, I didn't see any pushing and shoving, I just saw a party, and I could not believe the amount of people that were there as we just looked out at this wall of humans.
Yeah, you're right, Eric, the view, and I think I posted when we came up York Street past Union Station, and I posted a 1-minute thing on my Instagram, and I look at it all the time. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. you got to be freaking kidding me when I look at that whole thing. And then it was when we were on, I guess it was Lakeshore, coming underneath the Gardner. We'd done an interview with Danny Green, and when you finished, I reached into my bag for earplugs because I thought I was going to lose my hearing.
Yeah.
Like the sound was just bouncing off the Gardner coming back at us. And like you said, when we turned to go up York Street and past Scotiabank Arena and like right around Union Station there, like I was totally blown away. Like, and you and I kept jumping from bus to bus, right? Doing the interviews, and we started on the 5th bus, then went to the 4th, then we couldn't go on the 3rd. We jumped up to the 1st, back to the 2nd. We made our way back, and like it was fortuitous for us that we were on the last bus getting to City Hall because we got to see everything in front of us.
Yeah. And we got to see Marc Gasol completely in the bag, which was a show in itself.
Yeah.
All right, you're definitely going to have to do a second episode in a few weeks because I want to actually talk about the Raptor years and not just glaze over it like I was forced to do because of the timing. We've only got 7-8 minutes left here. So I want to get into the Darryl Walker stories and talk about the lean years, talk about the Vince years and transitioning to Bosch and then Bosch into DeRozan and Lowry and everything else. I want to get into all that. So we're going to have to just commit an hour to that, as I say, in a few weeks. To end it here in the last 6-7 minutes, there's a couple of different things. I know Sportsnet's going to be airing the Kobe 81 game, which you and I had a chance to broadcast that game and sit right there courtside, barely 10 feet to the left of the Lakers bench with Kobe Bryant checking in front of us.
You know what I remember
What's
late
that?
that game?
Yeah.
When you pulled out your flip phone.
Yep.
And you looked at me and you said, "Should I take a picture?" Because it's like some people would look at it as unprofessional.
Yeah.
And I think I had enough perspective at the time to say, "Hey man, this is history. Take the picture. Like we'll worry about it later. Like we'll beg for forgiveness later. Take the picture." And I remember you taking the picture and as him walking off the court with his finger in the air. It's like,
yep.
That was a moment too. That's a moment that I'll never forget.
Well, and it's funny because you think about now, like we had a chance to broadcast that game, and then sadly we're broadcasting and on the air in radio and television roles respectively on the day that he died back in January with the helicopter crash. But then you think about now the biggest story that's everybody's talking about right now in the Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, that's out. And my kid says to me, he's like, "Did you ever get a chance to see him play?" I'm like, "Buddy, we broadcasted games. I've seen him. I've seen him firsthand. I've watched him." And you start to think then, as I kind of bring this full circle to where we almost started with you, from going to from Wilt to Kareem to Magic to Jordan to Kobe to LeBron. We've seen a lot of those guys now too, and seen some of the best in the league in just our time together, let alone in the Raptors' 25 years. It's just wild to think of where Toronto was as a basketball market and what you lived through, even more so than me, where they were in their initial years when they finally got a franchise, to where they are now, not just in the city, not just in the province, not just in the country, but even globally, what the Raptors have become.
Yeah, you're right. And I always forget the global piece. It's certainly a Canadian thing right now. The same way, anybody who was there when the Blue Jays were doing their thing in '92, it united the country. And I joke about this. There are people in Saskatchewan that could care less about Toronto. I mean, the West they're not big fans of the East at times, but there they were opening their stadiums for watch parties.
Yeah.
And people said, "Well, wow, can you imagine if the Leafs win?" And I say, the people in Calgary and Edmonton and Winnipeg, Vancouver, they ain't cheering for the Leafs. They're not going to travel across the country for a party. And basketball's got a real foothold now. It really, really does. I remember the night you and I had the hoop show, and I said, and there was no social media, but I did get a couple of emails when I said basketball will be as big as hockey in this country. It may not be in my lifetime. I don't know if we're there yet, but we're getting close. And some people might say we are there, depending on the generation you're from. But I mean, it has a foothold now, and it's not going anywhere, because in the early years, people thought it would never last.
Well, and I think the thing that you and I have both discussed over the years that I just, to this day, don't quite understand is why there's not room for, not,
both.
and I won't even say both, why there's not room for everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never, like, listen, I grew up with, as much as I love Magic Johnson, the Showtime Lakers, was a huge hockey fan, had Wayne Gretzky drapes, let alone T-shirts and jerseys and, you know, pillowcases. It's like my drapes were 99. Like, but I loved hockey. I loved basketball. I loved baseball. To this day, why can't you be a Canadian and have a passion for hockey, but still enjoy the Raptors and the NBA, but also enjoy soccer and baseball and football, whether it be NFL or CFL? Toronto Wolfpack's here now, and they're getting big numbers in terms of their draw and like it's
Because
to
you're
me,
you're a sports fan, E, and that's like me. I'm a sports fan. Like the day that Jack Nicklaus won the Masters in '86, the Leafs were playing a playoff hockey game. And I
yeah,
went with some of the guys from TSN to that game. We bought tickets. We were sitting way up in the top of Maple Leaf Gardens. But before we walked into the gardens, we were in a bar on Yonge Street watching Jack win the Masters. Like, what a Sunday that was. And, like, if you're a sports fan, there is room for everything.
all right, we're up against it, Jones. We only got about another minute or two left here before Instagram starts giving us a 30-second countdown. Last night I ended up doing an extra like 45 minutes with Damon Allens. I'm not going to do that to you. I'm going to say we'll end it and we'll bring you back for part two in a couple of weeks. I'm going to put you on the spot though, and hopefully you can answer it in 2 minutes or less, or you'll start seeing the countdown and you'll know you got to wrap. The moment that stands out for you in Raptors history, and you can't take the championship or the parade within the last year. If you had to think of one moment that we haven't already discussed, pro or con, what stands out for you?
The intensity of Game 3 in 2001 between Philadelphia and Toronto. Vince was coming off a 50-point game. Iverson, and like the noise at the then Air Canada Center and the playoff intensity that I'd witnessed running around with my brother for years of the Jordan Bulls and you know, all of those things in 90, 96, 97 and watching, you know, the finals, all of those years in 92 and being with Mark, and the intensity of the playoffs finally hit me in that series. Like, I remember that Game 3, Antonio Davis playing with a bad hand and coming down with a rebound for a dunk on the offensive end, and the crowd just losing it. I'm thinking, like, this is it, man. Toronto's arrived. This is playoff basketball in Toronto. And just the tingles that you get. I mean, you know this from being in the arena when it's that loud and
Yeah.
that intense. I mean, there's no other feeling like it. And we're not even playing. I mean, it's another thing when you're playing in that atmosphere, but just to be around it and experience it. And it's what grabs people and delivers to them a passion for the game.
All right, we're going to end it there then. I promise you folks, we'll bring Jonesy back, as I say, in a few weeks' time for a second episode. I haven't extended that to anybody yet, but my man Jonesy, we have to bring him back because we didn't get in enough time for all of the stories. So, and blame Instagram. These things should be longer than just an hour, but I don't know if you'd stick around for another hour. Anyways, I don't want to keep folks up till midnight. So we will do part two another day. Jonesy, thanks for this, and I'll be talking to you, if not tomorrow, obviously on Friday. So stay healthy, man. Stay safe, and we'll talk soon.
You too, E. Thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
All right. That was Paul Jones, folks, and we're going to wrap it up here because I've only got another 30 seconds left. Thanks to everybody that was watching tonight. Sam and Brendan and Phil, Dave, DC. The boss was in watching the show as well. Kevin, Ben, so many others that were dialed into the show tonight. Thank you to all of you who have been watching, not just tonight, but to all of the shows. And tomorrow night, I'm going to be having a special guest joining me as well. Check my feed later on for that, for more details. But I can tell you, it's Hollywood director Brad Payton is going to join me on the show. Brad's a Canadian from Newfoundland, and he's responsible for some big-time movies with The Rock, like Rampage, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Daybreak on Netflix, a whole bunch of things. So we're going to kind of shift gears from sports and talk the world of Hollywood and entertainment tomorrow night. Midweek with Eric Smith. Thanks, folks.